So let's start with a quick pop quiz. Hopefully, you all don't feel like we're in school again, but I do think this is going to be a very helpful thought exercise that we're going to keep in the back of our minds as we work through all of the different content today. So throw in the chat, what does success look like for you as all of you are running your startup? And it's okay to be super honest, right? A lot of people have A as their number one goal in the back of their mind via IPO acquisition, make some money. Other people just want to do what they love and they weren't able to do that in a corporate setting. Or you just want the freedom to be your own boss, set your own schedule, do what you want without having to listen to other people. Or some people may want to be famous, be the next Elon Musk, the next Steve Jobs, right? Build that legacy for yourself. But deep down, what does success actually look like for you when you're thinking about running a successful startup? So feel free to use the chat. I would love to get a quick poll from people.
I was just going to say I'm old, so I have no use for money, being famous or doing what I love or being my own boss.
Well, I mean, helping people could be doing what you love, right? So as you can see here, everyone's got different definitions of success and different reasons as to why you all started your startup or became entrepreneurs to run your own business. Now, a lot of these, I would say, actually all of these, you could do if you got a quote unquote boring corporate job. I know some of you may have had bad experiences in the past. Maybe you had a bad manager. Maybe you chose the wrong career initially. You got burnt out. There's many reasons as to why you all may be against working in a corporate setting. But hopefully by the end of today, I can show you that you can achieve all four of these if you choose the right job at the right company and you have a good boss. And even if that's not for you right now, that's okay. This session today will hopefully kind of open your mind up a little bit, get you potentially thinking about it, and we can build on top of it from there. All right. Now, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. Please don't shoot the messenger here. And I'm not trying to discourage anybody, but statistically, 90% of all startups fail. 90% of all startups fail. And by fail, that would mean either running out of funding, or going bankrupt, or the market not buying enough of your products, or you just burn out, right? There's many different reasons as to why startups may fail, but 90% of them unfortunately will. And I'm not trying to crush anyone's hopes and dreams here, but I do think we all need to set realistic goals and understand that statistically, 9 out of 10 of us in this call will have a startup that doesn't quite make it or doesn't quite work out for now. And that's what hopefully you all are in this session to do, is to see, okay, what are my potential exit strategies if my company is not able to make it? What could I consider doing that would also potentially make me happy, make me rich, make me famous, or help me do what I love in replace of my startup? Now, this is one of my favorite quotes, something I do live by, and this is something that helped me better plan out my career transition and my career switch, which is, he who plans to fail is failing, or he who fails to plan is planning to fail. This is a great quote from Winston Churchill, and this is something that is going to be very beneficial for all of us, whether we are entrepreneurs or we just have regular jobs like myself. It's always good to have a plan and think about what you would potentially do if something negative were to happen in your career. And hopefully today we can help you build out some sort of plan, career plan for yourself, to see, okay, what does my future look like if my startup were to not make it? And what you could potentially do about it, and what does that actually look like? Today we're going to be covering when you should quit or take a break from your startup or entrepreneurial endeavors. Which of these corporate jobs would be potentially a good fit for you? That's a big problem that I've had to help a lot of the entrepreneurs that I coach work through, is how can I choose the right job for me? As an entrepreneur, as a CEO, you wear many hats. You do marketing, you do sales, you do engineering, you do product management, you do program management. Which job is best for you? And then once we figure out what that job is, how do you actually get it? How do you make that switch from being a sole proprietor into working, excuse me, in a corporation? And then we will have formal Q&A at the end, but I don't want to run this like a lecture. No one likes to go to class, right? So feel free to use the chat function, throw in questions in here, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can as I go through it. I want it to be as interactive as possible. I want all of you to get the full value because you did take time this morning. And Yeah, I want to help as many of you as I can. So that's the agenda today. If there was anything that you thought I was going to cover that is not on here, throw that in the chat too, and then I can do my best to work through all of it. So I should be able to get through everything here in the next 45-ish minutes, and then towards the end we'll have formal Q&A. How do you know when to take a break from your startup? Put it on pause, think about another job, maybe come back to it later. When's the best timing? I know the biggest fear that all of you will have is that you'll quit right before you're about to have your big break, right? It's like those actors who go to Hollywood and they have dreams and goals of getting there, and they're working like a waiter job or a retail job, hoping to get their big break, but they never really know when is the best time to quit and try to do something else. So hopefully in this next section, I can help all of you sleep a little easier at night and at least give you the roadmap on how to know when to take a break. And unfortunately, I don't have a blueprint or a straight up answer that I can give all of you because it's going to be different for everyone. It's different for everyone because all of you will have different financial constraints, different personal constraints. All of you will have different funding resources, different run rates. All of you have different business models. And there's market timing that you're also going to have to take into consideration. There is no time-based measurement. I can't tell you, okay, give yourself 5 years. If you don't go public, then it's time to quit. It's not really the best measure for everybody. I can't also tell you, okay, if you don't have a minimum viable product in the next 6 to 10 months, then you should quit. As long as you're making progress towards a goal and a milestone, then I don't think you necessarily need to take a break right now. And what this picture is trying to show you is that you do need to set realistic milestones. And if you're not able to hit these milestones, then that's when you should consider taking a break. And one thing I do also want to mention here is it's far better to pause your startup and take a break, get a corporate job too early than too late, right? If there's this line of like the perfect time to quit, none of us have a crystal ball, but let's just say there was a perfect line here. This is like the ideal best time to quit your startup. It's far better to quit right a little too early than too late. The reason being is it's much easier to get a job when your company is doing okay or doing well and you decide to take a break. That's a much easier story to pitch to hiring managers than when you're running away from something. Because when they ask you why are you switching and you tell them, oh, you went bankrupt or your startup failed or you ran out of funding or no one bought your product, right? It's not as good of a sell for you as opposed to saying, well, my startup was actually growing, but I wasn't able to reach the targets that I wanted. And now I'm considering getting a corporate job. Or I have certain personal situations in my family that have required me to shift my focus to something else, but I was growing at X%, or I just got, X and X amount of funding, etc. It's far better to quit a little too early than a little too late. So how do we set actual realistic milestones? Well, you're going to want to think about 4 key areas when you're setting these milestones for yourself. And if you're not able to hit all 4 of these things, then you should consider taking a break and pausing. Obviously, there should be some time-based constraints. I'd highly recommend you set things at least in 6-month increments. 6 months is good because it gives you quite a bit of time to make actual progress towards some type of goal. But it's also not too long where you can't course correct and you can't shift and jump into a corporate job if you need to, right? So I would set goals at least 6 months apart. The second, of course, is financing. Everybody knows about your funding, how long you have, what your run rate is. It's going to be different for everybody because everyone has different spend. Some of you may be self-funded, some of you may be having investors, but obviously finances is going to be something you're going to want to include in your milestones. And the reason why I bring this up is because everyone always waits until they have no funding left or they literally burn the last dollar and then they have to look for a job. As I mentioned before, it's easier to get a job if you're pausing a little too early than too late. So you're going to want to start looking for a role if you're running out of funding and you've only got like a 6-month run rate, because you want to give yourself some time to get a job. You don't want to put you and your family in any financial constraints where you literally have no finances left and now you have to get a job. Getting a job in desperation is also not good because then you'll most likely settle and take a job that you don't really want. So make sure you are budgeting and setting out your financial goals and milestones appropriately. The third one here is you're going to want to listen to the market. Some of this is dependent on your business model, but some of it is also dependent on the timing, right? Apple was not the first company to ever think about a smartphone. There were other companies that tried it before, but their timing wasn't right, or their execution wasn't right, or the branding wasn't right, and the marketing that they did wasn't right, or they didn't have Steve Jobs. So you could have the right idea, the right product, but maybe the business model isn't correct right now, or your pricing or the supply chain constraints make your product too expensive and it's not the right time. Maybe you need technology to catch up with you. There's lots of reasons as to why you may have a very good, solid idea, but maybe the market or the timing just isn't right, and that's okay. That's why we're just going to take a break, potentially get a job, and then you can always circle back to it when the timing is correct. This fourth one always gets overlooked. Always gets overlooked. And that is you got to think about how running your business, being an entrepreneur, is affecting not only your health, but also the people that you care about. If it's negatively impacting your relationships, then you should also consider that to be a certain milestone, right? If your wife or your kids start to mention that they don't see you very much, or that you're really stressed out, or you notice that your health is going down in a significant way. We all know that you need to make some sacrifices as an entrepreneur. No risk, no reward. I totally get it. But you also need to keep your personal life and the people that you care about and that you love in mind when you are setting your milestones. At least every 6 months, you're going to have some type of realistic milestone based on either your funding constraints, your product design. You're going to want to set some sales targets, listen to the market, understand your business model, and then factor in how this is impacting you and your family. A job could give you a bad personal life, depending on which one you take. But that's why you don't want to take a job out of desperation, and you'll be able to filter through and have your own criteria as to what job you would want to take. And the good news is if you don't like your job, you can always quit and get another one, right? But if you don't like your startup, it's like, oh, I got funding, I've got employees that are dependent on me. It's a little bit harder. You don't have that flexibility. And as someone who worked in management consulting and accounting, I can tell you that I did not have the greatest personal life. There's actually a photo of me working with my coworkers until 6 in the morning. And then we were allowed to take a 30-minute nap. And then I had to go back to work. So I once worked for 23 hours. Here are some common reasons that your business may not work out right now. And if you're seeing any of these signs, you should consider potentially taking a break and getting a different type of job just to bridge the gap, build up some more funding, and maybe you find a job that you love. Took 7 months to get a full-time. Yep, it is going to take a while to make that transition from being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, running your own business into getting into a corporate job. And I'll explain how to overcome some of those common objections and hurdles in the third part of the presentation today. But here are some very common reasons as to why your startup may not work out. If you see these signs, consider those to be part of your milestones that you're going to want to aggressively set for yourself. Number one, everyone knows that. Number two, we talked about that already. Number three, this is also related to timing in your business model, but look at your competition. Is there another bigger, more well-funded company that has the same idea as you, that's a little bit farther along in their product development, that they're getting more interest from some of these investment firms? You're going to want to consider what the competition looks like. Number four, if some of you have co-founders or your business is growing, you're going to also want to keep in mind on how how your leadership is looking at running your business. If you're having any conflicts here, I know a lot of people start startups with friends, and you're going to want to look at those relationships. I've seen a lot of friendships being burned over money and over decisions on how you're running your business. So take a look at that. Your business model. Sometimes you have time to pivot and adjust your business model, right? How you deliver your products, how you're sourcing your raw materials, who your manufacturer is, what your pricing is going to be, how you're ultimately going to provide value to your customers. You're going to want to look at your business model as well. Now, if you're listening to the market, you would also get a sense if your business model is set up correctly or not. Number six, this is actually going to be a big one for quite a few people, especially if you're doing anything in like the health space or anything online these days. There's a lot of new regulations constantly coming out, even for software companies, right? There could be potential legal challenges and timing that may impact the success of your business. For example, when Uber was getting started, a lot of the business was dependent on how the government would react and allow strangers to drive strangers around, and how you would handle some of the legal uh, complications if something happens, if there's an accident, if God forbid, there's someone who tries to kidnap you or something, right? There's legal and regulatory challenges that could have basically not made Uber and Lyft a business at all. And so they also had to wait for the government and regulatory bodies to either approve or catch up with some of the technologies or ideas that you all may have. And then, of course, if you're burning out, may want to consider taking a break. If there's anything that I missed on here, also throw that in the chat, because that could give people a spark or an idea as to, okay, maybe the timing isn't right for me and I should consider getting a different job. Now, as a recruiter, I can give you all a little sense of what compensation would look like if you were to get a boring corporate job here in the Bay Area. All of you may not live in the Bay Area, so for those of you who live in like New York and Bay Area typically pay the same. If you're on any of the coasts, like you're in Seattle or San Diego, Los Angeles, generally it's about a 5% difference. And then if you're anywhere in the middle of the country, it's usually like a 10 to 15% difference. The only exception being Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas is usually just like a 5% difference from the Bay Area. But this is generally what you can expect for technical and non-technical positions. Now, I don't know anyone's years of experience or things like that, so I just wanted to give a general range of what you could consider. The software engineering or the engineering titles are in parentheses, and the regular like corporate G&A job titles would be in not parentheses, basically. And these are, in my opinion, pretty conservative total compensation ranges. This is not base salary. This is total compensation. So this would be like your base salary, your annual bonus, maybe your company gives you stocks and things like that. But this is what you could generally expect if you were to get a corporate job. Not saying everybody will get this, but this should give you a general sense of compensation-wise what it would look like. The reason why I have this on here is because there's also a misconception with some of the people that I talk to that you won't be able to afford living if you take a corporate job. And the only way to make good money is to run your own business. There's a lot of that in social media, right? Like you see those clips on TikTok of famous people being like, if you make less than $1 million, don't work for somebody else, right? I see those all the time. You could make good money if you have a corporate job, right? And some of you actually may make more money over time if you had a corporate job than if you ran a successful startup and went IPO, right? Unless you're the next Google, Amazon, or Facebook, which less than 10% of you will be, then you would actually probably make more money, have less stress if you had a corporate role. Especially those of you who are engineers, like if you're high enough, if you're high up enough, you're making like upwards of $500,000 a year. This is from compensation data that I have access to, as well as other sources from like competing offers and other things like that. Glassdoor, not always super accurate. Blind, always not super accurate. So yeah, this is kind of where mine have come through. So remote jobs, the way that companies compensate and pay for remote jobs is based on where you would be sitting. So they're going to pay you market rate on your current geo. So depending on wherever you are, you take 5%, 10% roughly off from kind of where these are. So now that we have or know how to set milestones so that we know and can feel comfortable taking a break or pausing or quitting our startup based on certain timelines and other things, how do I know what job I should actually apply for? Quick quiz, put it in the chat or just answer it to yourself. True or false? As a CEO, as the owner of your startup, as an entrepreneur, you wear multiple hats, you do everything, engineering, sales, HR, marketing. That must mean you are qualified for all jobs. True or false? From a recruiting perspective and a hiring manager perspective, the answer is it's false. You are not qualified for everything. Now, I know everyone in here put false because it seems very obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people, when you are writing your resumes, will think to themselves, I mean, I'm basically a product manager, so I should apply for product manager roles. Well, and I also built the app, so I'm also qualified for software positions. Oh, but then I also have to manage my team, so I'm also a program manager. Oh, but I had to pick benefits for my employees, right? I had to choose the benefits plan. I had to like write offer letters. I was doing recruiting, so I'm also qualified for HR jobs. Oh, and then I had to raise funding. So I can do business development too. Yeah, yeah, I can do all of those. Every single entrepreneur that I've worked with has gone through that thought process. And it's totally normal to think that because you've had to wear multiple hats. And depending on how long you've been running your startup, if it's been 3+ years, you actually could be potentially qualified for some of these other jobs than what you were doing from before. But you do need to keep in mind how recruiters and how hiring managers actually look at your experience versus how you feel your experience lands. I always started my own startups and I moved to the US and I want to get work. How likely would it be that I get a job if I've never worked corporate? That's what we're going to answer right now, actually, is which type of corporate job would be a good fit for you based on what you've done. And if you want to get a job really fast, I'm not saying that it's going to be the job that you're going to love, but if push came to shove, right, and you needed to get a job really, really fast, I would look at it in this order of operations. And if you don't need to get a job fast, then you can take your time and you can still use this criteria, but then you have the luxury of filtering out jobs that you wouldn't want to take. The hours aren't good. Maybe you want fully remote. They don't have fully remote. You'll have more time. But let's just say worst case scenario, you ran out of funding, you need to support your family. How can you get a job ASAP? Well, you're going to look at it in these order of operations. What is your main role in your startup? I know all of you are CEOs, entrepreneurs, VP of engineering, etc. But what do you really spend most of your time on with your business? Like, what is your main job? What do you contribute the most to in your own company? Generally, a lot of that will stem from number two, which is what were you doing before you decided to run your own startup? Some of you may have engineering backgrounds, sales backgrounds, supply chain backgrounds, who knows? But typically, one and two usually go together. Now, a lot of hiring managers and recruiters will hire you based mostly on number two because they're going to want to see, okay, what is the majority of your expertise in? What do you typically do the most of? And they're going to lean towards where you have the most experience out of your startup. If you've been running your own startup for, let's say, less than 3 years, a lot of the hiring managers and recruiters will be heavily weighting on number two. If it's been more than 3, 4, 5 years of you running your own business, then you have a little bit more of that flexibility to try and consider applying for other roles than what you were doing before. Number three, do you have management experience? How big is the team that you're managing in your startup? If you're a one-man shop, don't quite qualify for managerial roles. If you've got a team of less than three, most companies do not consider that true management in the corporate setting, right? Teams of less than three usually don't exist in a corporate setting for manager level positions. But if your team is greater than 4 or 5, then you could consider applying for a managerial role, like a manager title, maybe even a director title, depending on how much years of experience that you have. Now, why number three is important is because if you are able to apply to and are qualified for managerial roles and above, they generally don't have as many technical interviews. This could be on the engineering side, but even on the corporate side, right? If you're in a managerial position, you're usually not hands-on anymore, which would better suit the interviews to your area of expertise, right? Because otherwise, if you're applying for, let's say you're a software engineer, right? And you don't have, and your startup, you're not managing a big team. And maybe even before your startup, you were not managing a big team, but you've got 15 years of experience, right? You may think, okay, I've got 15 years of experience as a software engineer. That makes me at least a software engineering manager by years of experience. However, if you've never managed a team, you're not qualified for that. And that would mean you'd have to apply for non-managerial IC roles, which means you're going to have like 5 or 6 coding interviews, which means you're going to have to go and study and you're going to have to relearn all the different data structures and the algorithms all over again. But if you actually have management experience, you can apply for manager level roles and you won't have to spend 20 hours on lead code. So if you have big team management experience, try to aim for those as well. Number 4, forgo the ego. It's going to be tough mentally as well as convincing hiring managers as well, but it will be tough moving and shifting your mindset from being your own boss, being a VP, being the shot caller who gets to make all the decisions in your company, to moving into a corporate setting. And some of you may also believe that because you have 20 years of experience, you should be a director. Sometimes it works out that way, but a lot of the times, if you weren't a director before, it's it's tough to get back to this to a level that you believe you are, because you run a startup. You're going to want to consider your scope of work. And the scope of work should really drive the level of job that you are applying for. And this can go for the company that you run today and or what you were doing before. Depending on how long it's been since you've had your regular corporate job, think about your scope of work and how that translates into a corporate setting, because that's what hiring managers will be thinking about, right? Scope of work is defined by either the size of your business, the size of your product portfolio, the number of customers that you have, and your annual revenue or sales targets. And if your company is regional, regional or US based or international, that's your scope of work. And then you got to think about how that translates into corporate jobs, which will then also give you an idea, okay, of what level of job is appropriate for me to apply to. So keep all 5 of these in mind if you need to get a job ASAP for yourself. And if you're wondering, okay, well, what job do I get? You need to think, okay, what is my main role today? What am I really spending time on? What do people in my company come to me for? Does that align with number 2, which is where the majority of my experience is? If the answer is yes, then we're going to move on to building your resume from there. So I would love to get a volunteer to come off mute, talk to me a little bit about your background, what you're doing at your company, what you were doing before, and then let's see if we can find what type of corporate job would be a good fit. Does anyone want to volunteer and go through that this thought exercise? What's your business that you run right now, and what would you say you spend most of your time on doing?
Right. See, basically, I am from Bangalore in India.
Mhm.
I used to work for IT company for almost 11 years, and afterwards I quit and started my own brand of coffee products in India. It's a family venture, so I started working on it, but it's now almost 6, 7 years. I feel that it's going nowhere, and I feel that my time is also getting wasted. So I feel we are also going through a little burn down. So I want to get back to work.
Mhm.
And I don't know, somehow I saw your message on Everbright and I said, okay, looks like it's the right message from the universe to attend your call to see what's in it for me.
Well, thank you for volunteering. I'm sorry that you don't
Thank
feel
you.
like you're making that progress in your family business, but I love coffee. I think a lot of people love coffee. So
Yeah.
we appreciate you. Okay, so 11 years doing IT. What was your specific job?
So I was basically into retail IT, where I used to work on the retail POS tills when people come for shopping.
Okay.
There's a cashier desk. So we used to do retail implementation. So the programming guys used to program it, and we used to schedule it in such a way that when the downtime is there, we implement or move all the software, test it before the next day morning the cashiers and the store opens,
Hmm.
and there is no business impact because a till going down is a huge business impact for any retailer.
Okay. So it's like software QA testing type of role,
Implementation, yeah,
implementation.
implementation, QA, and testing.
Okay. And then in your coffee business, what would you say you spent the most amount of time doing?
I think the most amount of time I did was talking to people, sourcing coffee,
Okay.
roasting, understanding. I did a lot of courses on coffee as well.
Okay.
I think I did a lot of marketing on international markets too.
Okay.
And most of it was, I think, when it comes to system, I think most of it was just looking at the invoice, keying it onto your system, those kind of manual job, which I think any any person can do that kind of a job.
Okay. So you really haven't used your engineering background in the last roughly 6 years.
Correct. Not to the great extent which I thought I could have. I didn't.
Right. Okay. And then how big is your coffee business right now?
I think we're just a three-member team, three,
Hmm.
four-member team.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, as I told you, we are just going through a burn down because of a lot of the coffee cycle is cyclic, and due to which the crop and yield is also pretty less this season, due to which
Right.
we are going through this rough patch currently.
Okay. And then have you been able to sell to like big retailers, or are you mostly selling on like
We are
your own
basically
shop?
the D2C brands, uh, where we're e-commerce based as well as our own shop.
Okay. And you said you are in some of the bigger brands?
No,
Okay. So mostly online and your own shop, brick and mortar.
that's correct. Yes, and
Okay.
Amazon India.
Amazon India. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So just based on the information that I have so far, I would say since the majority of your last 6 years has been on sourcing and supply chain, maybe a little bit of marketing, um,
Hmm.
you could consider that route. However, the scope, which is what we talked about here, let's go back. The scope of work that you have in terms of like supply chain and marketing doesn't translate into the corporate company setting, right? Unfortunately,
Hmm.
even though I would say your most of your experience in the last 6 years, supply chain, sourcing, vendor management, right?
Right,
Doesn't
right,
necessarily fit into the corporate setting where you'd be managing a larger scope of work. But you could look at vendor manager roles. That's one thing, because you have more than 3 years of vendor management experience, for example, or supply chain.
correct.
So you
Yep.
you could start there because you have a good chunk of experience. You'd have to play around with your resume quite a bit to see if you can get those
Hmm.
roles. But probably the safer bet would be to go back to your implementation QA testing role because you have more than 10 years of experience doing it. Now, you may not have loved it. That's a different story, right? Or you may have to brush up on some of those technical things again, which
Right.
may add a little bit of time into your transition, right? Because you're gonna have to study and then re-interview and apply. But my initial thought would probably be leaning towards your prior role just because it's more than 10 years of experience and the scope of your startup or your business today doesn't quite fit into a corporate setting. But if you were able to find like a smaller growing startup in a
Hmm.
similar space as you, who maybe has gotten, Series C, Series D funding, and they're looking for someone to handle supply chain or vendor management. That could be a good fit because the scope of work would be very similar. All right. So now that you have a general idea of how to kind of think about what jobs you would want in a corporate setting, where you could be best spending your time, how do you actually get this job? Phase three, always the hardest, right? How do you actually get across the finish line and do it? Where do you start? Well, networking. The good news is, as entrepreneurs, all of you are probably very good at networking at this point. All of you are very comfortable talking to people, talking about yourself, talking about your background. But the biggest hesitancy that I get from the people that I coach is they don't actually want to start talking about the fact that they're thinking about quitting and getting another job. A lot of the people that I work with say that, it it kind of hurts their pride a little bit, right? Because you don't want people to know that you failed and now you're quitting and you got to get a regular job again. But you didn't fail. You're pausing for now, right? 90% of startups fail. There's, as you saw earlier, there's many different reasons as to why the timing of your startup may not be correct. And that's why, like I mentioned before, it's far easier to quit too early than too late. And that can also be how you're going to word these things. You're going to tell people that you're considering a change. when you're networking. You're not saying that you're quitting or your startup's not doing well, right? You're not saying that you're quitting and things are going poorly. You're just going to say that you're considering a change. You know, it could be for personal reasons, for financial reasons, for who knows, right? Or maybe it's because you realize that by doing your own business, you've actually figured out what you truly love to do. Maybe it's vendor management, maybe it's supply chain, maybe it's operations, right? You used to work in IT, but now you realize you really love being out there in the field, traveling, talking to suppliers, smelling the coffee in your hands. Just let people know that you're thinking about a change. And then these conversations can lead to other things. You would be surprised, as especially if you're well connected in your own startup spaces and markets, you'd be surprised what types of opportunities could come to you when you tell people that you're considering a change. So start there. Of course, you have to update your resume. Now, when you're doing that, you're going to want to look at number 3 and number 4 that I have on the slide here. When you're updating your resume, you're going to have one resume for each type of job that you are applying to. I know it's a lot of work, can be very annoying, but you just need one version of a resume for each job that you are targeting. Now, most of you are probably only qualified for like 2 jobs at the most, maybe 3, but that's really it. I haven't met a single person that's equally qualified for like 5 jobs. Pick 2 or 3 jobs based on the criteria we covered before, your most recent experience and or what you have the most experience doing, and start there. And your biggest barrier when it comes to these ATS systems, these algorithms, the AI that all these companies are using now is your job titles and how you address yourself in your summaries. All the people I coach, they always starts with, I'm a CEO of a successful, wine business, coffee business, looking to transition into a corporate sales job, right? Your job title matters. So when you put what you're doing in your current company, if you say CEO or you say VP of engineering, right? Think about how the ATS system is going to be looking at that and comparing it to the job that you are applying for, right? If you're applying for a software engineering manager role and you put your title today is VP of engineering, doesn't quite match up and you're going to probably get eliminated by the ATS system. Your job titles really, really matter. And this even goes to the jobs that you had before your startup. If some of you are going to be using this time to make a pivot and do a career switch, think about the jobs that you've done and what you should be putting on your resume, because it all needs to tell a cohesive story. That's the other thing that a lot of people forget about when they're working on their resume is the story that it tells. Maybe your summary at the top says that you have transferable skills and that you're looking to transition from being a CEO to working in, as a director of marketing, but maybe all of your prior experience has no marketing at all. So then what does the story tell about your resume? And those are the biggest barriers that you're going to have to address. But this is where to start. So when you realize the timing is potentially right to take a break, this is where you're going to go. So someone was asking about my opinion on freelancing as opposed to working for a permanent job. Freelancing is great. You're still technically running your own business, but you will have to negotiate your terms. You'll have to set up like your own separate LLC. You'll be paid probably on like a 1099 from different companies. You'd also have to figure out how to get your own healthcare and benefits. But freelancing could also be a nice middle ground where you can still be your own boss, but also have a consistent paycheck coming in. But as a freelancer, you will basically have a part-time sales role because as one project ends, we'll have to go out, do some business development, get another job, set pricing, set terms, create a new contract, sign that contract. And then you're gonna have to figure out, healthcare and things like that. So maybe you're on your spouse's plan and you got all those things covered. But freelancing is also a viable option. But from what I've seen, most people make more money getting the corporate job. And then you can always just move from one corporate job to another if you wanted to. When you are trying to get a corporate job, these are the common concerns that you need to know that you need to address. This is going to be both in your resume, you need to proactively address these, and when you're getting your interviews, talking to recruiters, talking to hiring managers. Of course, number one is how are you going to work in a team environment? You've been your own boss, you've been the CEO, you've been the one in charge. Now, how are you going to translate and work in a team setting when you're not the boss anymore? How is that going to work? Why are you looking to switch? It's like one of those common interview questions. Why do you want to work here? Right? Why are you looking to switch? And again, like I said, better to leave too early than too late, because you don't want to be running away from something. They'll know that you're desperate. It takes away your leverage and your negotiating power for your compensation. So make sure you have a good answer as to why you are trying to switch. And saying that your startup didn't work out, not the best answer, right? Usually, instead, you can talk about the company itself. So you no longer focus on you, but you focus on the company, right? You say, oh, well, I was running my own business doing X, Y, and Z, right? We were making great progress. I was able to secure number of vendors, number of customers, whatever. But then I heard about your company, right? Something about your company's mission really spoke to me. And then you do a little bit of research on the company, right? Oh, and as I learned more about your company and I read about this role, it actually reinvigorated me and it got me interested again in working in a corporate setting. There are a few things that I miss working in a corporate setting than what I have in my regular, like in my startup today, like X, Y, and Z. And then you talk about now how you have certain experiences, either from your startup or from before your startup, that is a perfect fit for this role at their company, right? So you shift it away from you and you shift it more on the company as to why you really want to work there. That's how you would handle that objection. Hiring managers are also going to be wondering, what are you actually good at? They know that if you ran your own business, you do everything, and you may feel like you're good at everything. So what are you actually good at? AKA brush up on your technical skills. And technical skills are not just for engineers, right? If you're trying to get a marketing job, you need to relearn all of the latest marketing tools and softwares that large corporations are doing. You need to learn about all the latest BI tools, right? Tableau, Power BI. What are these words? How do I use them? Do marketing departments still use them? Which softwares are best for which size of company, right? You're still going to want to do your research and brush up on your technical skills, accounting, finance, marketing, operations, legal, supply chain, HR. You're going to want to still practice on all of those before you talk to recruiters and hiring managers. And when you figure out what those keywords are or those technologies, you're going to want to incorporate those on your resume as well. And a big thing for entrepreneurs transitioning back into the corporate setting, we always run references. We always run references. We have to. Because if you've been your own boss, it's hard to tell if you're lying or not, right? On your resume or in your interviews, because you can say you accomplished X, Y, and Z in your business, but how are we going to validate that? You don't have a boss, right? There's no one to say if that's true or false or whatever. So they're definitely going to ask for references from your previous employers. The references should be prepared. So make sure you talk to them, prepare them before you share their names, obviously. And the higher the person, the better the reference, right? And they're obviously going to want to talk to someone who used to be your manager. So make sure you have your references lined up and ready to go. Yeah, or like someone from your investors, your board of directors, right? Those people are very good references to have. Very, very, because they're kind of like a pseudo boss, right? If they're giving you the money, they also kind of have some negotiating power, some leadership decisions. So those would also be very good references. Yep. And as someone in the chat mentioned, your job title really does make a difference. They changed their job title from founder to operating manager, and then they were able to get traction with their resume when they're applying online. So I'm going to move into the Q&A section here, which is perfect timing right at the top of the hour. I've got about 20 minutes reserved for Q&A. If any of you want additional resources, I've got a YouTube channel. We're on the road to 3,000 subscribers this year. You can reach out to me if you want a free strategy session to talk through kind of your particular situation, what kind of jobs you should be considering. Feel free to sign up at my website, careershakers.com. But I am now opening the floor for Q&A. Use the chat function, come off mute. I would love to answer any questions you all may have.
I guess one of the things that I sort of noticed during your presentation was, to some extent, you're sort of apologizing for being embarrassed or sort of discounting like that you tried starting your startup. And actually, my experience has been that it's actually something you can leverage. It's something that you can, that and this may just be the result of like, where I am, because like I have 25 years as an engineer in Silicon Valley, working for corporations. I worked for Yahoo like a year ago, and I wrote an O'Reilly book. So like, when I sort of go into an interview, I mean, it's really easy for me to get engineer interviews. And when I go into an interview, a lot of the times, I mean, if I can answer the technical questions, they don't care what I've been doing for the past year or forever. They're just like, do you have the skills? And so like I have used, when I have gone in and I said, well, I haven't been working for a year, and I've been doing this thing. A lot of times they're like, yeah, tell me more about that, or like, that's cool. Or, and I felt like, if I sort of played up the stuff that, yes, there are companies that there is a group of companies that will be basically like, F you, like, you think you're great, you're not so great, I'm going to take you down a peg. But like, especially the expensive, or not the expensive, like the FANGs, like, I wanted to say good companies, but that's not really fair. But like sort of the really known name brands, they're like, yeah, I've thought about doing that too, or like, yeah, what was that like? Yeah, show me your product. And so like, a lot of the people, or at least the engineers at the it's sort of the companies that are doing well, where everybody's making money, they're really sort of, open and sort of positive about things. They don't need to tear down other people. And so like I was actually, I guess when I was looking at, well, if you need a job fast, it kind of was like, well, you're trying to like sort of avoid like telling them that you were starting your own startup, and instead sort of say, well, like, sort of like make them not really notice. Whereas it would be nicer if there was some way you could say, you could leverage it into like something that was a good thing that you did.
Yeah, so it'll be dependent on the type of job that you're applying to, right? And I think in your situation, you said you have 20 years of engineering experience, and when you're able to get the interviews, they want to know about your startup and things like that. But the difference is you're able to get the interview, right? Because you have 20 years of concentrated experience, focused experience in a particular role. So that's why you're able to get the interview, and then you can talk about how your startup has been beneficial to the growth of your career, or how it can help that company, right? But the people that I work with, most of you may run into this barrier. You're going to have difficulty just getting the interview, and how you can even get there to then talk about how your startup is a good fit for them. You're going to need to think about these things in this order. It doesn't mean that your startup experience doesn't matter or it's not as good. It's still valuable, but you need to think about, okay, what is the scope of work? And also, where is the majority of your experience? Because the biggest barrier is just getting the interview. If you can get the interview, then you can spin your story into whatever best fit it is. And also, if you've only been running a startup, let's say for a year or two, it's not a big time in the overall span of your career. But like for the volunteer earlier, he's been running a coffee business for 6 years now, right? Totally different from what he was doing before in IT. So now how do you build a resume around that? How do I get an interview for a job if I haven't done IT in 6 years? Or if most of my job is focused on supply chain and vendor management, right? So that's the kind of situation that I built this context around. But if you are in someone else's position, like yours, Dan, right? Absolutely, for sure. It's probably an asset to these companies, right? Because you've had more freedom and flexibility to try different things. You probably had to learn new technologies. Maybe you've dabbled into a different industry. So it definitely enhances your background for sure.
Yeah, I guess you did mention the guy who did the coffee startup, and I think he had mentioned that he had worked in IT for 10 years. before he had done the coffee startup. So I sort of, that actually seems like sort of a test, because like 10 years is not nothing. I mean, even if you haven't done it for 6 years, like there's lots of people out there that have less than 10 years of experience.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it probably, and it's something, and like IT probably doesn't change that fast that it's like irrelevant. And
Right.
so,
But
like,
at the
I'd
same
actually be
time,
curious if he had trouble finding jobs, or whether
yeah.
like he could actually take advantage of, like, I know I haven't been doing this for the past 6 years, but I did it 10 years before that. So
Yeah, but that's also
do you
the
buy
biggest.
that, or do you not buy
Yeah,
that?
so from a hiring manager perspective, and I mean, you could tell us too, Dan, if you're a hiring manager, right? But from a hiring manager perspective in a highly competitive market, if you had the choice of hiring someone who used to do this job 7 years ago, 6 years ago, or hiring someone who already does the job today, who would you choose?
Well, so I would, if they both had 10 years of experience, I would obviously choose the one who had done it recently.
Correct,
Um,
right? And then because you're and the reason in your head, even if you're not saying it, is because of the recency, right? Like, okay, is he rusty? Does he still know how to do this? Has he been practicing, right? Like, that's the reason as to why your initial bias is to hire someone who has the more recent experience. It's not because, oh, his 10 years doesn't count. It's because of these other unconscious biases that hiring managers will have, right? And that's the barrier that you need to overcome with how you structure your resume and what jobs that you're targeting, right?
okay, yeah, I guess I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Speaking of highly competitive market, how is the market at this time? It is super, super tough. After all of the tech layoffs, there's a huge influx of basically everything: engineers, recruiters, sales folks. The market is very competitive. It's competitive because if you think about who you are competing against, right? As the average candidate, you are now competing against people who used to work at LinkedIn, Microsoft, Tesla, Google, Facebook, right? On paper, their resumes are just naturally very strong. Not saying that yours is not, but that's the competition that you are competing with. So just applying online without a referral is super competitive, right? Because as a hiring manager, if you had a choice between hiring someone from a top company in a particular industry or someone who is at not a top company, it doesn't mean it's a bad company, but if you had the choice between the two, just on paper, face value, most hiring managers would automatically interview the person at the top company in that industry, right? It doesn't mean you're not a good candidate, but that's why you need to get these referrals, work endorsed referrals, so that you can actually break into the top section so people will allow you to interview. But the competition is super tough.
The .com bust, I got when everybody was looking for jobs, I actually got a job at an office manufacturer, um, an office equipment manufacturer, and they, like all companies, they had technology. They actually had technology products, and at the time I was like, well, I don't have that much experience, and I don't have, I like didn't work at any like top companies, but I really noticed that, like, for the most part, people who sort of work at top companies, they will only apply to other top companies, no matter how desperate they are. And like, for the most part, like if you're kind of working at like a non-top company, you don't really want top company people coming into your company and like sort of like telling you what to do or sort of messing around with you. And so like, I mean, you would think that like when you're looking for a job, you're like competing with everybody, but it's actually surprising how often how few candidates lots of jobs actually get, just because they're just not that well known a company, and like they're like sort of the way they interview or the way they talk to people does not is like just not the same way that Fang talks to people and interviews people.
Yeah, and it's definitely possible. But also keep in mind the FANG companies right now are not hiring. So they don't have other top tech companies to go to apply to. So they will be applying for probably a lot of the same similar jobs that all of you will be applying to, right? Like if there used to be 100 companies hiring, which there were last year, if there's only 30 now, sure, maybe like 10 of them most people don't apply to, but there's still going to be a good percentage of them that everyone's going to have to apply to. It may not be their first choice, but if the market doesn't have that many roles, you're going to have to start to apply for other positions.
With so many people laid off, especially highly skilled people, do you envision that some of these people might start their own companies and attract investment, spin up, new organizations?
It's possible, absolutely. Some people do create their own businesses sometimes because they aren't able to get their own like another opportunity right away. But there's not a lot of funding right now. So if you are going to do your own business, it's most likely going to be self-funded, at least in the beginning, but it's definitely possible. And similarly, like some people will go back to school, right? Like if not able to get a job in a certain period, people don't want to have a gap on their resume. So they'll go get an MBA or they'll go get a master's and try to fill that gap with something. I'm not saying that that's the right approach, but it is something that people would do. Is it favorable to work for a smaller company or for an enterprise? It depends. If you love working for startups and like growing emerging tech businesses, they actually don't like people usually who work at larger corporations because their roles are very siloed, right? If you work at a large company, 10,000 plus people, if you're in marketing, you don't do everything in marketing. You only do typically like social media marketing, or you have just events and branding. Your roles are very siloed because that's how these larger corporations, that's the only way that they could properly function, is you have to have specific teams set up to do specific things. But if you work in a startup, you're going to have to wear multiple hats. You're going to have a very dynamic role. Your work hours are also going to be drastically different from working at a larger tech company. So it's more favorable to have worked at companies of similar sizes at the companies that you are targeting to get. But also, like if you work for a big brand name, usually that kind of helps you get any type of job.
And for recommendations, I think if you have people in LinkedIn you're linked to who liked you and they give you a recommendation, that's public for the world to see. You get to approve it or not. I think that's very useful.
From a recruiter perspective, we don't read your LinkedIn recommendations most of the time. Uh, just throwing that out there. But it is good to have. Is LinkedIn the right place to look for jobs? Usually most companies post on LinkedIn. I would say LinkedIn and Indeed are usually the most popular ones to look, but there's other smaller websites. Like there are some job boards that specialize in pre-IPO companies. There are some job boards that specialize in like externships or fully remote work. There's a lot of different specialized job boards now, but if you're looking for like just one-stop shop, I would say Indeed or LinkedIn. So if I was running my own startup, applying for another company, would they be concerned that I'm going to leave for another startup? I don't think so. Not at least another startup specifically, because generally, if you're making that switch from a startup to a not startup, you did it for a reason, right? So I don't think that would be the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, are they just going to leave to go work for another startup? Because they already know you're taking a break and coming to join them from your startup. So if anything, they'd be worried that you'd go to another competitor of a similar size. How would you effectively address questions related to this during the interview process? I mean, if you did get it, it's basically the same question of why do you want to work here? So you do your research on the company, you talk about why the company resonates with you and how you can add value there. If you can ever add an emotional or personal element to the story, that's going to help really sell it. Like when I was applying for one of the FANG companies, I told a story about how my grandmother's not very great with technology, but she was sick one day and my mom wasn't around. And so I used a search engine to potentially figure out what she had. And then we were able to like get some medicine and actually my grandma was fine. We didn't have to take her to the doctor. What is an example of good job finding websites for remote work? I made a video on this one. It's called flexjobs.com. How do I convince the prospective company that I'm indeed taking a full break from my startup? Won't they worry that I will still devote more than wanted time to my startup on the side, negatively affecting my performance in the new full-time role? Generally, that hasn't been a concern from some of the people that I've been working with. But it is something you can just proactively address by saying that, you could use the word quit if you want, or permanently taking a break, or deciding that the timing was not right for your startup. You can use different words to communicate that you are, quitting, for lack of a better word for it. Now, if your performance does go down, then obviously they would kind of assume that you're doing that. But as long as your performance doesn't go down, it should be fine. Which are the most important transferable skills for high paying jobs? Well, it's going to depend on the context, right? Like what type of job you want to get. But if you're just saying, okay, what are the highest paying jobs? Like surgeons make a lot of money. If you get to higher levels of engineering, they make good money. But even in it depends on like what high level or like what high paying means to you. But I mean, you can make a good living in non-engineering jobs, like if you're a director of HR, you can make 500, 600,000, right? And if you work at the top companies in tech, you're gonna make more than what I have on here. These are pretty conservative. What are the highest paying entry level jobs? I would say the highest paying entry level job is like investment banking, software engineering. They typically have the highest starting pay, but they also have the highest barrier to entry, usually. And that's kind of how everything always goes, right? The higher the pay, the harder it is to get it. For little to no prerequisites or requirements, are you saying if I didn't go to college, what is the highest paying job I could get? If it didn't go to college, I mean, you could do like a trade school. I think like electricians make pretty good, plumbers make good money actually, and then you could potentially start your own business. Real estate, you could get into real estate, but you wouldn't make a lot off the bat. But over time, you would probably make a good amount of money, and you don't have to go to college to become a real estate agent. Um, Recruiting, you could work in recruiting. We don't require a college degree, but you don't make a lot when you first start, but you can make a lot over time. uh what else would not require a college degree that pays pretty well? Honestly,
Well,
a lot of the trade programs pay pretty good.
and if you go to college and leave because you have a good idea, Zuckerberg has done okay, Bill Gates has done okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you want to leave Harvard after your sophomore year, yeah, absolutely. Or Stanford, if you want to leave Stanford,
Sky's the limit.
sky's the limit.
I got something to say about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that with Bill Gates, IBM put a computer in his school when computers were these extremely new things. So by the time he was 18 years old, he already had, 5 years and 10,000 hours in experience in computers. So,
Yep.
Grain of salt there.
Yep. But I mean, if you're really passionate about something, right? If you do a job that you love, or you find something you're really passionate about, it's easier to put in those 10,000 hours, which also could have been a factor to the success.